Everything for the Georgia Bulldogs next year is going to come down to the trenches. We talked about the offensive line already. Let's talk about the defensive line next on the Locked On Bulldogs podcast.
You are Locked On Bulldogs, your daily podcast on the Georgia Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Locked On Bulldogs podcast. I am Daniel, excited that you're here. Thanks for making us your first listen of the day. Thanks for being an everydayer. If you're here every single day, you're the reason that Clint and I do this podcast. We could not appreciate you more. If you stick around to the third segment, become a loyal third segment listener, the member of the 199, we really appreciate you as well. Today's episode brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Make every moment more with FanDuel Sportsbook, FanDuel.com. More on them in a second. But today we're talking about the defensive line at the University of Georgia 2025 season. If you missed it, we've been going position group by position group. We've been giving grades out. We've done everything on the offense. We've talked about the quarterback room. Gunnar Stockton, Ryan Puglisi, Montgomery. What do they bring? What kind of a grade do we give them? We talked about running backs. We talked about wide receivers, a lot of new faces in that group. How do we feel about that? We talked about tight ends. We talked about the O-line. And today we begin our journey through the defensive side of the ball, talking about the big guys up front, the defensive front. Now, we're going to kind of try to, everything is kind of nebulous, but just so you know where we're going, we're going to try to keep this position group separate from the edge, from the outside linebacker, the edge position. Now, I know some of these guys, defensive end, some of these guys might end up on the edge in certain snaps. It's not an exact science, but we're going to talk about kind of the three guys that typically populate the middle of the line. A lot more than three of them, but typically three of them on the field at the same time. So we're going to jump into that. Before we do, I can't help, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention that your Georgia basketball team, who you have been crapping on all year, got a pretty significant win last night over the number 3 team in the country, the Florida Gators. Arch rival Mike White's first win over Florida. I don't care what you think about Mike White. I don't care what you think about the hire. I don't care what you think about him as a coach. He brought home a massive win. Georgia's third massive win of the season. St. John's, a current top 10 team. Florida, a current top 10 team. And Kentucky, I think currently projected to be a 3 seed in the NCAA tournament. So that's a 1 seed, a 2 seed, and a 3 seed that Georgia has beaten this year. Third massive win of the season for this Georgia basketball team. Still very much alive for an NCAA tournament appearance. But I don't care what you think about Mike White. I don't care if you think he's a long-term answer at Georgia or not. You have got to be happy for him. He's had a bad run against his former team, the Florida Gators at Georgia, but got his first win as a Georgia coach against Florida last night, and it was an electric atmosphere. So congratulations. We will be keeping an eye on the Georgia basketball team. The tournament is still alive, and so there's still a chance that we could be talking about legitimate postseason basketball for Georgia this year, and that would be absolutely fantastic. All right, enough about that. Let's talk about this defensive line. Georgia does lose some significant pieces on the defensive front heading into next year. So we should start there. Let's start by talking about guys like Warren Brinson, guys like Nas Stackhouse, who are on their way out from the University of Georgia. And those are significant losses. I thought Warren Brinson and Nazir Stackhouse were 2 of the bright spots on Georgia's team last year. Now, Georgia wasn't elite in the defensive front. They certainly didn't have, we've talked about this often, they didn't have a Jordan Davis. They didn't have a Jalen Carter. And neither of those guys were that, but they were consistent and they were effective and they were productive for the University of Georgia. You also had Ingram Dawkins, who was an effective player for Georgia last year that is no longer with the team this season. And so those were three significant losses. And if I don't want to minimize those or make light of those. And so I do think that you're looking at a scenario where Georgia could be worse on the defensive line this year than they were last year. And that's not an exciting proposition if you're a Georgia fan, because while Georgia was good on the defensive front, they certainly were not dominant on the defensive front. And so the proposition of them getting worse. But when you lose, I mean, who I would argue were your three best performers last year, probably 1, 2, and 3. I mean, you could maybe make an argument that Kristen Miller was more productive over the course of the season than Ty Ingram Dawkins, but I think you're at least talking about 3 of your 4 best performers on the defensive front are gone, and maybe your top 3 performers on the defensive front are gone. That's significant if you're a Georgia fan. So it should make you feel a bit of concern. Some numbers came out. Bill Connolly, famous guy at ESPN. He's one of the few guys at ESPN that I'll actually listen to, that I actually believe when he has an opinion. He puts out every year. He compiles. He's a numbers guy. He compiles returning productivity numbers, and Georgia is abysmal this year. I mean, they return an incredibly low percentage of their productivity from last year. It's the kind of list that would lead you to believe that this is an absolute rebuild for Georgia. I don't think a program like Georgia rebuilds. I think a program like Georgia reloads. But the case in point, we're here talking about the defensive line today, and you got 3 of the most productive guys on that unit, and they are all gone. And the guys that you bring back, other than Kristen Miller, are almost exclusively really inexperienced guys, right? You do not have a lot of returning production from that unit. And so a lot is being made of the Bill Connolly stuff. We didn't do a whole, I don't know if we'll do a whole episode on it or whatever. I think Clint touched on it yesterday, but this is a great example of what that is. And now I will say this. I am actually really excited about the Georgia defensive line for exactly the same reasons that I just mentioned, why a lot of people might be nervous about the Georgia defensive line. I'm excited about the new faces. I'm excited about the infusion of talent. I think Georgia's got a chance to go from fine to really, really good, maybe even elite on the defensive front. I'm going to talk about why. I'm going to talk about who specifically, but first, want to let you know about these. And these, as I mentioned, are FanDuel, FanDuel.com, the number 1 sportsbook of all the Locked On podcasts. My personal sportsbook of choice, the Locked On Bulldogs sportsbook of choice. And they got everything. If you're an NBA guy, this is your time. If you're a Major League Baseball guy, spring training is here. I don't know if you bet on spring training games, but good luck to you. If you maybe you've got an edge, maybe you've got a guy, maybe you know somebody. But baseball is right around the corner. Obviously, college basketball is in full swing. You can get tournament odds during the tournament. You'll be able to bet on every game. You'll be able to bet on props and all sorts of things. FanDuel has it all. It's my favorite place during the NCAA tournament to be. Masters is right around the corner as well. So it's a perfect time to get signed up for FanDuel.com. You make your first $5 bet. They're going to fill your account with bonus bets right after you do. So sign up. FanDuel.com. Use the promo code LOCKEDON to get your bonus bets. FanDuel, make every moment more. So I mentioned Georgia loses a lot of talent. Nas Stackhouse, Warren Brinson, Ty Ingram Dawkins. And yet I am excited about this Georgia defensive front. And I'll start with the known commodity, and his name is Christian Miller. Christian Miller has been a really effective player in spurts at times for Georgia for 2 years now. He is a rising junior. He is entrenched in the program. There's been some rumors about transferring. There's been some rumors that we might lose him, that he might leave the program. He's not. He's here. He's all dog. And he is the anchor point of this defensive front. He is the guy that you feel like you can rely on. And I'll just tell you, I think the ceiling for Christian Miller, and I've always thought this, is higher than the ceiling for any of those three guys that I mentioned before. I think he is due to have a really big year. I think Christian Miller has got some pass rush skills that Nas Stackhouse and Warren Brinson, Tygram Dawkins just simply do not possess. I think his ceiling makes me really excited about all the snaps that he is going to get this year for Georgia, because he is going to be number one on the depth chart. Certainly when you look at the defensive tackle, the nose tackle, and the defensive end positions on that line. So Christian Miller excites me tremendously. I think he's established. I think his floor is very high, and I think his ceiling is even higher, which makes me think Georgia's not going to regress too much, barring some significant injuries, because we're not in a situation where we don't have any known commodities. And I actually think that with another year of Trey Scott, who is the best in the business at developing talent, I think Christian Miller is only going to continue to get better and better. I think he knows that this is his year. I think this is a big money year for him. And I think you're going to see it translate onto the field. And then I'll go to Jordan Hall, a guy that, well, I'll go kind of 2 for 1. I'll go Jordan Hall and Xavier McLeod. Xavier McLeod, another returner, a guy that transferred in last year, who's actually, I think guys come in and as a transfer, and you assume a lot about them. You assume that they are an older player. You assume that they've been in the program for a while. But Xavier McLeod, only a redshirt sophomore this year, same age as Christian Miller. So played last year as a redshirt freshman, spent 1 year at South Carolina, was able to maintain the redshirt transfers over. And he was a really productive player for Georgia last year. Honestly, I don't know where we would be without him. I'm excited for him to continue to develop because he's so young. Another year working with Trey Scott, who I already mentioned, who, how much I love that guy. I think you're only going to continue to see more and more out of Xavier McLeod. He would not be a guy that I would write off under any stretch of the imagination. He would not be a guy that I would just push to the back of the depth chart and assume that he's just a depth piece on this team. I don't think that's his role. I don't think that's who he is. I think he is a contributor on the Georgia defensive front. But Jordan Hall is the guy that I think I might be most excited about, and there's a big asterisk next to that. Jordan Hall, obviously injury concerns last year, missed a ton of time due to injury, but this is a guy as a freshman that I really, really, really liked. And I have every reason to believe if he is healthy, if he is able to be fully recovered from all those injuries, I have every reason to believe that Jordan Hall is a categorically different defensive lineman than anyone else on Georgia's roster. I expected huge things out of him last year. I expected by the end of the year for him to be like the number one guy on Georgia's depth chart in terms of the entire defensive front, including Warren Brinson, including Nazir Stackhouse. I expected him to surpass them by leaps and bounds last year. Now, part of that was probably me having unrealistic expectations for the young man. And part of that was obviously his season was derailed due to injuries. You never know how people are going to come back from injuries. I can't say that enough. I can't make that clear enough. You cannot just pencil in a Nick Chubb situation where the guy comes back from a freak, horrible injury. Now, Jordan Hall's injury was not like as catastrophic as Nick Chubb's, but you can't just pencil in a full recovery and that the guy returns to form. All right. For every Nick Chubb, there's a Branson Robinson. We hope that Jordan Hall is a lot closer to the Nick Chubb type of recovery than the Branson Robinson, as in we hope the productivity and the potential is all still in there, because if it is, now in his third year in the program, he spent a lot of time watching film last year. He spent a lot of time on the side last year. He spent a lot of time not being able to physically perform, but being mentally engaged. Now, as an older guy, keep in mind, this is a former 5-star, 99 overall recruit, like number 1 overall recruit type of guy. I mean, I think 24/7 had him in the top 10 nationally of all positions. Jordan Hall is a freak. He is a difference maker on the defensive front. If we get a full season of health from Jordan Hall at nose tackle, I am not going to evoke the names of recent Georgia greats on the interior of the defensive line. But the reason Georgia has not been who they were in 21 and 22, to me, is absolutely significantly impacted by the fact that we have not had a real difference maker on the interior of the defensive line like we did in 21 and 22. 23 and 24, we had good players, not a real difference maker. Jordan Hall is that guy. We've seen it. We've seen flashes of it already as a true freshman. I think we're going to see even more of it this year. I think he's going to play I hope he plays an absolutely pivotal role in this Georgia offense. I'm going to come back and I'm going to talk you through all the new faces that are coming to the defensive line, and I'm going to give you my official grade for the position. How much does my optimism influence the grade I'm going to give? How much does my nervousness influence? You'll have to come back and find out right after these. All right, well, we are back and we are talking about... All right, now we're back. Now we're back and we're talking about the Georgia defensive front. Georgia is experiencing a lot of turnover in this position, as we talked about. Warren Brinson gone, Nazir Stackhouse gone, Ty Ingram Dawkins gone. You bring back Kristen Miller. You bring back Xavier McLeod, 2 contributors from last year's team. You bring back Jordan Hall from injury, but then you're going... you're kind of going off the radar. So let's talk about some guys. And I'm going to start with the 2 guys that I think are in contention to start on that other side of the line, on that end position. And they are 2 rising sophomore, I guess you call them redshirt freshmen. I think they probably took a redshirt last year. They are Justin Green and Joseph Jonah Ajonye. So when you think about Joseph Jonah Ajonye, he is athletically as gifted as anybody in the program. But I wouldn't write off Justin Green in this spot as well. Another very heralded recruit from the 2024 class. These are 2 guys from the 2024 class. Both of them very heralded coming out of high school. Both 4-star guys coming out of high school. Justin Green from Lawrenceville, Mountain View High School is I think he's a legitimate threat to be for whatever reason, Joseph Jonah Ajonye has been sort of penciled in as in Georgia fans' minds as like the guy that's going to do it. And I think you probably have seen some of that from the coaching staff and some of the talk from Kirby and some of the practice reports and some of the garbage time minutes. I think that all bears out. I'm just telling you, I think both these guys are going to play this year. We know that Kirby and Trey Scott like to rotate guys. Glenn Schumann, they like to keep guys fresh. if they can in that position. Both these guys are going to play. And so the question is going to be not who had more stars, not who, flashed more in the spring game. The question is going to be who performs when their number is called. And I would not write off Justin Green. I think both those guys have very high ceilings. I really do. I think both of those guys' ceilings are as high as anyone could hope for from a redshirt freshman getting their first significant action. Now, obviously, it's a little bit of a dice roll. You don't really know what you're going to get from either of those guys, but I would expect both of them to play significantly, and I would expect both of them to play well. Another guy that I would watch out for is Jordan Thomas. I like Jordan Thomas from the 2025 class. He was a freshman last year, took a red shirt, got a little bit of action. I liked Jordan Thomas as a recruit. I like him now. He is big. He's physical. He is another guy that I think can come in and contribute. And so I would watch out for him. And then, guys, you can't record this episode. We're now 21 minutes into the episode. You can't record this episode and not talk about Elijah Griffin, right? Like Elijah Griffin is he is as exciting of a recruit as Georgia has had in quite some time. Like, we're talking about the number 3 overall prospect in America, according to 24/7. I think he was number 1 in some services, the number 1 defensive lineman, 6'5", 300. Like, this guy's got the high school resume and recruiting profile of Jalen Carter, period. Now, Jalen Carter turned out to be all that plus a lot more. We will see what Elijah Griffin turns out to be. And Jalen Carter turned out to be a person that did contribute meaningful snaps on the most loaded defensive line in the history of college football. That's how good he was. So if Elijah Griffin is even a fraction of that, one would think that he would be able to find a way to contribute meaningful snaps on this defensive line, given that it's not quite the caliber of previous years. I think a lot of it is going to depend on who is able to play what position, right? Can Jordan Hall be healthy and lock down that nose spot, the spot in the middle? If he can, that frees up Kristen Miller, obviously, to play more of a D tackle spot, which I think is also Elijah Griffin's more natural position, although I wouldn't be surprised if you saw Elijah Griffin moved over to end at times over with guys like Justin Green and Joseph Jonah Ajonye. And so I think you'll see moving parts. I think you'll see people in different places. But here's my big takeaway. Georgia loses some proven talent. The thing is that what that talent proved is that they were fine, good, pretty good, not bad, great at times in short spurts. They were proven to be pretty good. Georgia replaces that proven talent with some guys that have elite upside. I'm talking about elite upside. Kristen Miller has great upside, but guys like Jordan Hall, Joseph Jonah Ajonye, Justin Green, Jordan Thomas, Elijah Griffin, these are guys that have the potential to hit big. And Georgia's got a lot of them. Georgia's done well in recruiting the last several years along the defensive line. And I think this is the year that Georgia fans really start to see that pay off. And so when I think about a grade for this unit, it's tough, right? It's tough because in some sense you're betting on a lottery ticket, but you're betting on several lottery tickets and thinking, well, if just one of them hits, Georgia's got some pretty stable pieces like Kristen Miller and Xavier McLeod that they feel like they can rely on. And so maybe if one or two of these guys really pops, that could be huge for Georgia. On the other hand, you're losing almost all of your proven productivity. And so things like the floor is really low for this unit. My projection for how good the defensive line is going to be in 2025 is an A-. Now look, this is a projection, and I will be the first to admit to you, this could just be me drinking the Kool-Aid, but I'm here to tell you guys, I'm drinking the Kool-Aid at this position. This is the position. These guys, the names that I've just mentioned, these are the guys on this defensive side of the ball. There will be some units on the defensive side of the ball that Clint is much higher on than I am, and that I disagree because I have concerns and I have worries. This is not one of them. This is the one that I'm like, I think Georgia's, I don't want to say addition by subtraction because that disrespects the guys that left that did great things for the program. But I want to say addition by addition of all of the young guys that are going to get snaps this year, because I think at least a few of those guys are going to really pop and become not just productive players for Georgia, but game-changing, difference-making players for Georgia. And if I've said it once, I've said it 1,000 times. That is what we need in order to get back to the championship caliber form, which, yes, Georgia made the playoff last year, and that's better than other schools like Alabama. But we're not trying to just make the playoff. You and I both know, watching Georgia all year long, Georgia was not a championship caliber team last year. We weren't a championship caliber team. We just weren't. So what gets us back there? I think nothing would be more significant than having game-changing players on the defensive front. So that's the defensive line preview. Let me know in the comments what you think about it. Go back and listen to all of the other previews that we've done. Come back the rest of the week. We'll have more defensive depth chart previews for you. And until then, I'll talk to you guys later.